Guys, let's get straight into the content because this is going to be a long video of Yasmin Mohammed, a human rights activist, sitting down with Alex Phillips and discussing the dangers of allowing men that don't subscribe to Western values, i.e. Muslim men coming from Muslim nations, into the West and what implications it will have in the long term. So yeah, let's get straight into the video, guys. No introduction. Let's go.
Do you think that it's plausible that there's an increased risk to the female population through the importation of a lot of men from culturally different, largely Muslim countries?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely going to be an increase in crimes against women if you're going to be letting men into the country from Muslim majority countries, because the way that they view women is very different than the way women are viewed in Western nations. So if you look at, for example, Egypt, the country where my mother is from, women there, 99.3% of women report being sexually assaulted. 99.3. It's an astounding number. It sounds like hyperbole, but this is a true number, and the research was done by UNICEF. And the reason why you see such astounding numbers is because it's so much a part of the culture. It's so normalized. This idea of gang rapes that we've heard about that were happening in Germany, for example, so when men go around a woman and basically like predators, pouncing on their prey in the middle, which we saw happen in Tahrir Square in Egypt. That's called taharrush. It has a name. It's a part of the culture. It's what men do when they see a woman alone, and when she's not, protected by other men around her, then they consider her to be prey, and then they do this. They surround her. In Islam, there is this idea that if a woman is covered in hijab, she is to be protected. She is not to be raped. And if a woman does not have hijab on, then she's asking for it. It's free for all, basically. And so there's a very clear differentiation between how they treat not just Muslim women and non-Muslim women, because even if a Muslim woman is not wearing hijab, then they will treat her with the same disdain and attack her in the same way. And having said that, the truth of the matter is this 99.3% number that I gave you, a huge amount of those women are in hijab and even in niqab as well. Because at the end of the day, when you raise your boys to think of girls as lesser than and to see them as things to be used, then that's what they're going to do. They're going to, whether the woman is in hijab, whether she is not in hijab, whether she's in niqab, they treat women in that way. They think that women are there for them to use as they please.
True.
But it has to be said that when they are European, non-Muslim, Western women, this is exacerbated. They see all of these women who are non-Muslims as completely loose whores, just women that they can use and throw away and that they shouldn't care about, that they don't need to care about, because they have been taught that these women are unimportant. So in the Quran, they talk about what your right hand possesses.
Yeah.
Malakat aymanukum. And that means that what your right hand possesses are women who are sex slaves. Non-Muslim women who were taken as war booty, basically. So that's the kind of thing you would see with Yazidi women in Iraq, with Israeli women and Hamas, with Hindu women in Pakistan, with Christian women in Nigeria, and here in the UK you saw that with the gangs, the Rotherham gangs, and it's all coming from that same mindset of non-Muslim women being, just treated with such disdain that they can just be used and abused and thrown away.
Do you think it's ever possible, when you look at countries that do publish data on sexual assaults and rapes by nationality, it's startling, it's alarming, countries like Sweden, Denmark. But do you think it's possible to ever integrate these men, to re-educate these men, or do you think that's essentially a lost cause?
Well, I think that we should take a step back, and before we allow men to just come into the country, whether it's on their dinghies or whether it's through open borders or however it is that they're coming in, that's the problem. The problem is that we're not controlling our borders, and what we have to be doing is we have to make sure that the people that are entering the country are people that we want here. They are people that share our values, that possibly have skills and abilities that are going to be able to serve the country that they are joining. But what happens is we're just letting anyone in that carries such deeply held beliefs. And then we expect that just because they move geographical locations, that they're going to suddenly change their minds and see women as equals, or, no, absolutely, that's not going to change. That's going to take generations to change, if it will change at all, because these ideas don't have borders. They get perpetuated, right? Generation after generation, they're just teaching their children the same thing again and again. It's what I was taught in Islamic schools in Canada. I was born and raised in the West. Many of the people that I speak to on my podcast, born and raised all over Europe, America, Australia, it doesn't matter. We're getting taught these things in Western countries. So the geographical location makes no difference. What they believe is what they believe. If you were to move to Cuba, you're not going to suddenly embrace communism. Your beliefs, your values are going to remain the same, and the same is true for them. So no, I don't think that there's any hope that we're going to take men like that and encourage them to evolve 1400 years. No, I don't think that's the case at all. I think we should be making sure that only the people that align with our values should be welcome into our countries.
What on earth do we do about communities that are already here? There are parts of the UK that have very predominant Muslim populations, and they tend to often be ghettoized, and they tend to often be cut off from the outside world. What sort of extreme measures or policies should governments be looking at to say, okay, we now need to deal with this, if they ever do decide they need to deal with this?
Yeah, so I think the first problem is the one that you mentioned there, which is the ghettoization. So when you have these separatist communities, as they call them in France, where they live in completely separate areas. I was speaking to a woman who grew up in Scotland in a Pakistani ghetto. She didn't even speak English. She'd never met shopkeepers or in the bank, or everybody she's ever interacted with has been Pakistani. And it's pretty shocking how separate these communities can be from the countries around them. And I was speaking to a Somali man in Australia, and he was telling me the exact same thing. An Afghan girl in Sweden, and she was telling me the exact same thing. You live in such a separate bubble that you are unaware almost of the country around you. And that was my experience as well in Canada. I lived in the exact same way. So first of all, the problem is that ghettoization. That we have to break apart. So when you start bringing migrants in, bringing refugees in, what they do is they tend to put them in the same area with other people with the same cultural or religious background, because they feel like that's going to help them to assimilate better. I disagree with that. I don't think that that's going to help them to assimilate at all. I think that's going to be the opposite of helping them to assimilate. It's going to encourage them to continue speaking their own language, following their same culture, and they're not going to assimilate into the larger society. And I've actually heard this from other immigrant communities as well. So as an educator, we have a lot of international students from China, and in Canada we do the same thing, where we take these populations from China and we put them in areas that are highly populated with other Chinese people. But they say to me, that makes it harder, because when do I get the opportunity to speak English other than when I'm in the classroom? Because whether I'm at home or in restaurants or in the bank or in the shops or everywhere, we're just all speaking Cantonese to each other. So I think that's the first problem. And then the second problem is that we do not apply the law to everybody the same. We treat people differently based on their ethnicity or based on their religion. So if man A has perpetrated a crime and he happens to have the last name Smith or Jones, and he's got blonde hair and blue eyes, and man B has the same crime, but maybe he's got darker skin and his name is Ahmed or Ali, then they're going to be treated differently. People are going to be afraid of the term Islamophobia, bigotry, racism, whatever, and so they're going to be treating that second man differently. And that is what empowers them. So in my book I talk about how that happened to me as a child when I went to my government and I told child services about what was happening to me in my home, and I was treated differently than another Canadian girl would have been treated. If a regular Canadian girl whose family came, generations ago from Scotland or Ireland said to them, I am being beaten, I am being hung and whipped, then that girl would have been taken out of that home. But because it was me, because my family is Muslim, because my family is from Egypt, they said, well, that's your culture. Right? And we see the same things with female genital mutilation, a big problem here in the UK and in America and Canada and everywhere else. If a blonde-haired, blue-eyed father took a razor to his daughter's clitoris, that man would be either in prison or in a psych ward. But when a Somali father does it, or when an Egyptian mother does it, then it's like, well, we'll give them a pamphlet and we'll educate them. You see, and that just empowers them. That just encourages them to continue doing what they're doing, because they know that there's no red line, that they can do whatever they want to do. And to be perfectly honest with you, you might have read this in Ayaan Hirsi book Infidel, where she talks about how the Somali community were taking advantage of the social services that were being offered. And the same thing was happening with my community in Canada. And my mom would straight up say, like, what are they going to do? If they say anything, I'll just tell them they're being racist. They know what they're doing, and they're using whatever loopholes that they can use to control and manipulate and get as much as they can get out of these societies that are welcoming them in.
Why are governments so afraid of tackling this? Why are they so afraid of Islamophobia? I mean, it's ironic, isn't it? They talk about Islamophobia and they seem to be the ones who are the most phobic of Islam. But why is it, do you think, gotten to the stage now that this is such a serious issue, the safety and integrity of women in a country, that should be paramount to any government's concern, protecting the most vulnerable in their own society? But women and girls are being thrown under the bus because they're more afraid of offending Islam? Or why do you think that is?
I've grappled with this question a lot. Why is it? Why is it that people are so focused on protecting the Pakistani men, for example, from perceived Islamophobia or bigotry, instead of thinking about all of the girls that were victims of these men? Why were there politicians and journalists and law enforcement people risking their careers and risking their reputations to speak out in defense of these little girls? Why was this happening? And at the end of the day, I think it always comes down to money. Somebody has to be benefiting from this. I don't have the answer yet as to who is benefiting what, but somebody is benefiting. And I don't know who it is, because it's certainly not the citizens of this country. It's certainly not the women. It's certainly not the girls. The migrants that are just coming in and being put in hotels, and I can't see the immediate benefit for them either. Where's the benefit? Who's making money, or why would a government choose to continue to allow this to happen? I mean, Douglas Murray wrote his book in 2016, The Strange Death of Europe, and you read it now and it's like a prophecy. Everything he said has come true. And we saw it coming. We saw it coming a mile away. And so many of us have been talking about it for so long, and we are the ones that are demonized for even speaking out about it. But I don't know what the answer is. I don't understand what it is that is so important that they're willing to sacrifice their daughters.
An argument could be made of why there's a sort of tiptoeing around some of these issues, in the sense of governments may be worried about reprisals against the Muslim community. Is that something that you think is a viable reason to say cover up certain things or to not publish certain crime statistics because, you know, hey, there's going to be a load of moderate Muslims out there whose life's going to be made more difficult?
I don't know about that. I think it might be more realistic that they're afraid of how Muslims are going to react. You know, like in France, for example, when they said that women can no longer cover their faces, they had riots going on for weeks. Police cars being burned, you know, it was mayhem. And it took a long time, and to their credit, the French government just waited until they finished their tantrum and they said, and the law stands. Nothing has changed. Now that you've gotten it all out of your system, it was all for nothing. So good for them for not changing their mind, whereas you see that's not the same, for example, in countries like in Denmark, when there was an Iraqi man who burned a Quran. He used to be Muslim and he doesn't believe in the Quran anymore. In fact, he's very angry about the Quran. So he decided to use his freedom in his new country to burn a Quran publicly. And there was such a pushback from other Muslim people in Denmark and Sweden, you know, and surrounding areas, that Denmark actually ended up making a law that it was illegal to burn the Quran. You can still burn a Bible, you can still burn the Torah, but you can't burn a Quran anymore. And that's the exact wrong move. You know, what you're doing there is you are allowing the bullies to control you. You are allowing the bullies to define your laws and to define the parameters of free speech or free expression of your country. You know, and it's beyond infuriating to see that. It's terrifying to see that. It scares me to see that, because I was born and raised in that. You know, I was married to an Al-Qaeda terrorist. I understand how their brains work. And I know that they are seeing that as such a win. They're seeing that as Allah's on our side, and that's why we're getting them to capitulate. Look how they prostrate to us when we tell them what to do. They listen, and it just encourages them to keep going and going and going. So what we have to do is we have to stand firm, and even when they do have their protests and their rallies or whatever anger they're going to have, let them do it, and do not change your laws. Stand firm.
Why do you think more women, especially sort of, you know, self-titled feminists, don't talk about this? Why are they so afraid to address this issue?
That is the question of, I think, 2 chapters in my book where I grapple with that question. Why are Western feminists not standing alongside these women? Why are you still afraid of speaking up against one of the world's most misogynist institutions right now, that is controlling women to such a degree that in countries like Afghanistan, women are neither to be seen nor heard. They have to be covered head to toe. Their voices can't be heard. Not just a woman speaking to a man, but women speaking to another woman, even her voice can't be heard. Women can't go to school. Women can't go to the park. They can't ride in a taxi. They can't drive a car. And this isn't just Afghanistan. A lot of those laws are in Iran as well. Laws like that exist in Saudi Arabia. You know, Afghanistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, these countries have nothing, they don't have a language in common, they don't have a history in common, they don't have a culture in common, they don't have food in common. The only thing they have in common is Islam. So when that religion is ruling over girls, then those girls are going to be suffering immensely, whether it's child marriage, FGM, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And why aren't these Western women standing alongside the feminists in these countries that are screaming for support? I don't know. In Iraq right now, they want to claw back the age of marriage from 18 to 9. And the women that speak up against that are being so demonized. They're being told that they're Western puppets, and they're losing their reputations, they're losing their jobs. These women are risking their lives to speak up. In Iran yesterday, there was a young woman in her university in Tehran that was being harassed by the morality police, and she got so frustrated that they were pulling on her hijab and telling her, you know, you should be wearing it like this and like that She got so frustrated she ripped off her clothes, and she was walking around her campus until the morality police picked her up. So that's the level of courage that we're seeing from women in these countries. And then women in safe countries, women with power, are not reaching out their hands to support those women. Instead, they're reaching out their hands to say that the Taliban have changed and they're humanitarians now. You know, like they're supporting the oppressors of these women. That's what I see happening. And I don't understand why, you know, there should be no moral ambiguity when you see the women of Iran screaming for the woman-like freedom movement and ripping off their hijabs and burning them in the streets. There's no moral ambiguity there. It should have been so easy to support those women immediately. But Western feminists were afraid of offending the Islamic regime of Iran. They're afraid of offending a totalitarian theocracy that kills people for speaking their mind and for choosing the clothes that they want to put on their body. That's who they are supporting, instead of supporting the women.
What was your personal sort of wake-up moment when you just said, I don't want to be part of this anymore?
Well, in 2016, there was a women's march in Washington, D.C., and they took the American flag and they turned it into a hijab. So they took a universal symbol of freedom and they contorted it into this tool of misogyny, and then they turned that into the poster for the Women's March. The poster for the Women's March was a woman in an American flag hijab. It was the most perverted, disgusting, rage-inducing image I had ever seen. And that's what made me decide I want nothing at all anymore to do with the left, whether it's liberals, Democrats, anybody on that side. They are supporting my oppression. They are supporting the deaths and the abuse and the torture of women just like me, not just all across the Middle East and North Africa, but all across the world. And so, of course, I want nothing to do with them.
We often see reports in UK press of the murder, the abuse of young girls from Islamic families. And it's not often reported honestly in the press, but one begins to suspect that there are probably a fair number of honour killings taking place in the United Kingdom. How much is that sort of bedded into the culture of Islam?
Honor killings, honor violence are completely normalized within Muslim communities. It is so normalized that is what we get told as girls. Like it's so normalized that when I was going to Islamic school, we would share with each other the kinds of things that our families would say to each other, would say to us, to threaten us, to keep us in line. So my mother, for example, would say to me, I'll just bury you in the backyard and say that I sent you to Egypt. So this was before there was social media, and it would have been really easy for girls to disappear. And in fact, a lot of girls did disappear. What you see on the news is just not even the tip of the iceberg of how many honor killings there are actually happening. In the UK, you hear a lot, there was the story of Benaz Mahmoud, that poor young woman who went to the police a few times telling them, my father is trying to kill me, my father wants to kill me. And they didn't believe her because it sounds so like the kind of thing a young woman would say when she's exaggerating. Oh, my dad's trying to kill me. But they don't understand that in these societies, that's actually quite normal for her father to try to kill her because she dared to be too Western. And she took off her hijab and she had a Western boyfriend and she wasn't living the life that they wanted her to live and she wasn't marrying the man that they wanted her to marry. These are crimes that get women killed all the time, all over the world. And unfortunately, there's such a silence around it because they all support each other. So like in Benaz Mahmoud's case, for example, you know, they weren't going to be getting any answers, even though there were cousins involved, there were uncles involved, her family members were involved, her siblings knew, lots of people knew, but nobody's going to say anything because that silence around it, that you know, these honor violence and honor killings is so much embedded a part of the culture that it is like it has twisted, has made it upside down so that the girl who is being too Western, she is bringing shame to the family, so she is the bad one. Whereas her father or her uncle or her cousin or whoever is the criminal, the murderer, he is the good guy. He's the one that is trying to restore honor to the family. And so they won't speak up against him because he is the honorable one. She is the dishonorable one. And so they'll never speak out against him. They'll speak out against her. And so unfortunately, you know, this is the same not only in the UK, but you see this in Italy, you see this in Australia, we have situations in Canada, you know, this is all over the world. It's a part of their belief system, which is that girls need to, they carry the modesty of the family, they carry the honor of the family. And the more a girl tries to stray from that and be an independent human being, the more she's risking her life.
The West has been warned, you know, she's gone into depth and she's explained the psychological, physical, emotional torture that Muslim women face. You know, she's explained, you know, the mindset, them understanding when they come to the West, they're prioritized. They could always scream the word Islamophobia and then law enforcement will back off. Okay, we're sorry, we don't want any parts of this. We don't want to be called racist, essentially. You know, they understand it. You know, they're in the system. They get it. You know, so will the West listen? I don't think so. And just the last point again, she said that someone in the West must be getting money somewhere. These things don't just happen. Someone's getting rich somewhere along the line and they don't care. They don't care about the West. They don't mind to see the West's demise because they are lining up their pockets with huge sums. I would even argue it's past the millions. They must be getting billions. Someone's getting rich somewhere along the line. And, you know, let's hope sooner rather than later, you know, we'll get to find out what's really going on here, because to me, it doesn't even make sense also. But anyway, guys, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you at the next video.